black man in my mid-30s, early 30s, Jesus, wearing a colourful fleece and big, thick glasses. Every Friday, we open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday. We offer you the chance to spend time in the space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Is anyone here new to the studio? Yes? Hey? Yes? Yes? Wow, that's a fair few. Welcome. So in case you don't know, we're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology with everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. It's a partnership between Watershed, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol and funded by Arts Council England. And we offer studio space, desk space, meeting rooms, events and opportunities to our residents as part of the spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. We're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make time for collaboration. Hey, where have you just come from?
Sorry.
Wow. Hey, welcome. You're welcome to sleep here if you need to. A few notes before we begin. Feel free to move around, make a cup of tea or grab a glass of water. The kitchen's just back there. We have a quiet space just to my left of here, so you're right. So if you need to take a break at any point, feel free to head in there. Fire exits are at either end of the studio, and one of the studio team, probably me or Celia or Joe, will direct you to the exits, should we need to use them. Accessible toilets and baby change can be found in the corridor next to the kitchen. There is a Q&A at the end of the talk, so those of you watching online, you can drop your questions into a YouTube chat, and Celia will read them out for you. Everyone else in the building, shoot your hand up, and I'll bring you a microphone. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio. And also, we just recently left Twitter. Anyone else left Twitter? Just one person?
Maybe.
Maybe? Okay.
No, I left a while away.
But you can now find us on Mastodon and Blue Sky as well. So go and follow us there, because it's much better. Oh yeah, we're also on Instagram too. So if you're more of a visual person, come check us out. You want to come and see us in the land of the pretty people? Our speaker for today is Dr. Libby Miller. Libby is a technologist and maker who enjoys making poor quality robots and thinking about connection, embodiment, and meaning. She's worked at the University of Bristol, the BBC, and a couple of startups, and is currently thinking about what to do next. Aren't we all? Today, Libby will share a bit about her 14 years working for BBC Research and Development and about how non-experts can be persuaded to participate meaningfully in technical projects using shonky, physical, and funny prototypes. So everyone give me a warm welcome. Give Libby a warm welcome, not me.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much for that lovely intro. And thank you for coming. Right, so this talk is going to be something, a little bit of my own history, some of the really great projects I've worked on at BBC R&D, Research and Development, a recommendation for a certain approach to projects, and an invitation to consider a missing piece of the problem, certainly one that I missed. It's very much my personal view. My ex-colleagues may not agree with me or perceive things the same way as I did. So this is me back 30 years ago. This is at Mr. Happy, but I was doing a PhD in economics, and I'd just decided it wasn't the right thing for me, and I hated economics by this point, and I thought actually as a subject it wasn't really going anywhere. But PhDs are also quite a lonely business, and I hadn't really found my community, and the whole economics department wasn't really... I was doing philosophy of economics. It was mostly about macroeconomics and game theory and stuff. It just wasn't the... Anyway, so... And then this is me a few years later. My friend Dan Brickley, my then housemate, showed me view source on HTML. He was always doing this to people, and it had very similar effects to everyone. I embarked on a tech career and started teaching myself Java and so on and how to do it. So he said to have sent me on that journey, and it's really served me very well. So I've had a really interesting career. I've met loads of really interesting people. I've made quite a lot of money. It's just a well-paid job. I worked at the Semantic Web over in the University of Bristol with Dan for a while, then in a long-forgotten streaming TV startup. And then last year, I left BBC Research and Development after almost 15 years. And by the end of that, I was co-leading a small team, and the idea was that we would come up with potential new futures for the BBC, because the BBC, like a lot of really big media companies, isn't used by young people. So they were worried about that, not unreasonably, and they thought maybe we could, a small multidisciplinary R&D team could figure it out. So, I mean, all this time working in research and then startup and then more research, I feel like technology served me very well, but it hasn't served us very well. So kind of 30 years later, I feel like now it's pervading everything we do. It's just not helping people. And I find myself drawn away from computers, which is unfortunate because that's where my skills lie primarily. But when I was an economics student, and one of the things that led me to economics was that I was always really fascinated by how things got invented and how they got made. So what leads to a new product? What's the process that happens that leads to a new sandwich, for example? How did a new sandwich get invented? But I was led to economics in order to find that out, and then economics absolutely doesn't provide that answer at all. So that was a non-starter. But having left economics and working at the uni, I was like, I used to go to the same sandwich shop every day. It was on the Triangle. I don't know if anyone remembers. It was great. Anyway, it was one of those ones where you can pick your own fillings. It's better than this one. It had loads of grey fillings. So having tried a few different things, I invented one that I really love, which was, and it is the best sandwich, actually. It's Stilton, walnuts, salt and pepper, granary bread, no salad, boom, it's the best sandwich. But the amateur sandwich maker, me, could design my own sandwich with the help of the experts who kind of selected the potential ingredients, who knew about different combinations and thought they're really good. So that's kind of one way of kind of solving this problem. And I've been calling it the expert amateur sandwich discovery problem. It's not a great name, but I can't think of a better one. And I think it's really important, and not just for sandwiches, for everything. Everything where there's a technology and there's people who want to consume it. Because people are experts in themselves and their own lives. And me, you, we are experts in different things. So it might be JavaScript, it might be Raspberry Pis, it might be ESP32s, it might be making sandwiches, whatever it is. To get the best combination of those things, to get the right thing to the right people, you've got to collaborate to make that happen. And that's the expert amateur sandwich discovery problem. So I feel like after 14 years at R&D, it's okay for me to have a philosophy of R&D, and this is it. So if you think about it's great, isn't it? So if you think about the possible space of, let's say, lunchtime foods, then we're looking to start in places we might not even have thought of. So we're going to ask people what they're doing now, like what their lives are like now. Where do they get their sandwiches? Where do they get their lunch? And then once we've done that, so we've kind of identified some of these interesting spaces here, then we use our expertise to burrow around in that specific area and to just really explore what you could do starting from that point. And the point is you would never probably have got to these initial spaces unless you had asked people about their lives. So you have to forgive this analogy. I'm not sure I like it, but I'm going to go with it. So we'll find out, let's say there's some interesting new Thai-German crossover place and people are going to that. And then we might start to invent things like basil and chili pretzels, green curry schnitzel sandwiches on dark bread, and then we'll go out and test them again with the people. So what we're hoping for is to end up somewhere new and testably popular. So we're basically interacting with people who are experts in their own lives at least twice, once to find out about their lives and then once to test things with them at the end. And actually, probably we want to do that multiple times. And now our expertise comes in this kind of area where we're like, oh, well, I really know, I'm really an expert on sandwiches and foods in general, and I can tell where's good to go in those places. And you'll have come across this kind of thing before. It's the double diamond or the treble onion in this case. So what we're doing is we're being extremely expansive. We're just testing things, and then we're showing people, and then we're doing it again and again, and at least 3 times, maybe more. Yeah, the difference between perhaps the standard definition of the double diamond or whatever, or the onions, whatever, is I'm talking about starting in in specific places where there's a discovery point before then. You're not just making it up as an expert. Because I've fairly recently, it's getting to nearly a year, so it's not that recent anymore, left BBC R&D, I was sort of still weighing on my mind quite a lot because I think we really did some excellent stuff. I think we had some really great processes as well. But it feels like now we didn't really manage to change a single thing, which is not great, but a lesson to be learned. So that got me thinking about when I first started at R&D, and I feel like I know that with a few very honourable exceptions, people weren't really interested in talking to end users in a very consistent way. And what they used to do is, and I'm sure you come across projects like this as well, where you got some sort of technology, you get funding for it, you do the project, right at the very end, you show it to some end users, and they go, whatever, and you never think about it again. So, and that always really baffled me. I was of the opinion that if you want people to use your stuff, you should probably talk to them before the end of your project so that you get some kind of sense of whether what you're doing is going in the right direction. Don't you want to know if the thing you're doing is actually wanted? And on reflection, I think the answer is no. So I think a lot of research, especially technical research, to be really honest, nobody wants to hear that something they've invented isn't wanted. Nobody wants to know that. Research projects are also about power and authority within organisations. So somebody decides who gets made, or what gets made, how long projects last, what gets culled. And this really matters, because if that is going in the wrong direction, then it's crowding out other projects which could be better, which have better processes, which are more useful, something of that nature. So this is kind of a story about a struggle to place some structures in place in an organisation that would defeat, or at least prove valiant opponents to some of the existing power structures within that organisation. But what we thought we were doing at the time was just being more efficient, because they were, well, you want to test your product. Well, we're going to test it more efficiently by starting earlier and, iterating over it. So, we were wrong. So this is our initial toe in the water of going to people where they are and asking them what their lives are like. So I was part of this attempt to solve the expert-amateur discovery problem. So how do you give amateurs, perhaps your future users or people who need something, the tools to contribute meaningfully to a technical project or enterprise? So this is some radios. I managed to dig out some old postcards. So as you can see, they're like a very primitive drawing of a physical radio. And we used to go to public events. I could only find 2 stickers. We made some stickers with like buttons and dials and things on them. And we asked people to say, what would your radio do, your ideal physical radio do? What would the buttons do? What would it do all over? And it, it's a really simple little exercise. It gets over this problem of having a blank page and that kind of thing. So people were willing to engage with it and do a little bit of drawing. But one thing we discovered, and it was really obvious in retrospect, but at the time it wasn't. It was quite startling. So young people didn't use radios. So this is a few years ago now, but still, they didn't use the physical radios in their houses. They had their own music. They listened to their own music. If anything, the radios were irritation. So this is a sort of example of a technique which failed because we're asking people to visualize how they would have an ideal radio. Their ideal radio was off. So it failed for them, but it indicated that there was actually a societal change going on. So it's like, there's still loads of people who have sandwiches, but there's a load of people who are now getting falafel instead. So and that kind of reveals a major change in lunch habits that's coming. So I don't know how far I can take this analogy, but we wouldn't have realised this was going on unless we'd have gone and asked humans about their lives before we started to actually make it. I think that's the main thing. So it allowed us to broaden out our remit from radios to audio, the role of audio in people's lives in general. And we found out stuff that we didn't know was there. So just a step back as to why it's important. I saw this and then just thought, well-being and eggs? Fresh milk, well-being and eggs. If you care about the quality and usefulness of the work that you're doing, that you want it to be useful for somebody or you want it to be useful for society and improve the world, or you think it's important for some reason such as fairness, that technologies needs to be, that people are affected by technology need to have input into it, or you want to find something new in a crowded market, or some combination of all those, then this is a good way of going about it. And we wanted to do all those things. So people are experts in their own lives, but they're not necessarily going to tell you about their lives if you just talk to them. So you need ways to help them express what they think, want and need. Because often people, and everyone does this, will just regurgitate something that they came up with, that they saw on the radio, or no, didn't see it on radio, which they heard on a podcast, for example, or on a film, or just read somewhere. It's really easy to do that. So, what you want to do is to get them to reflect on their lives and imagine what things would be like in the future and really feel what that would be like in the future. And so one of our areas of expertise was in designing techniques to help people do this. And a lot of them centred around prototypes, hence the name of the talk. I don't know how many of you have seen this kind of this diagram before. It's from a paper called "What Do Prototypes Prototype," which is really worth a read, because there's an awful lot of confusion around what a prototype is and what you're trying to do with it. So I'm not talking about technology demonstrators, which are somewhere along sort of the implementation thing. You do need to do those if you're doing does it work? And I'm not talking about the look and feel, like an alpha website or something like that, where you're like, well, should it be blue? Where should the button be? That kind of important stuff, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things what role does this thing going to play in someone's life with respect to technology? So I'm talking about things that elicit feelings and thinking from people about their lives with respect to that technology. So the experimentation we did suggests that although something real looking can help people imagine what it would be like, perhaps counterintuitively, something unlike the real thing, but that captures their imagination in the right way, might actually be more useful for figuring that out. And it's usually cheaper as well. So, how many of you know Richard Sewell? Anyway, I've worked with him quite a lot, and he's a very brilliant guy. And one of the things he often talks about is thingness. So if you can get people to interact with the right kind of thing, ideally a physical thing, but one which embodies a single idea, then you can get really great feedback and attention and authentic and genuine involvement in figuring out what it is. And you're getting people to imagine what it would be like if a thing was real. So this is where it's counterintuitive. If you're trying to test a website, you test a physical box of some kind that does something instead. But once you've done that, you can apply those insights to digital objects, images, whatever you think. I have talked about The Archers Avoided before. If you're not a Radio 4 listener, The Archers is a long-running, like really long-running, like 60-year long-running audio soap opera. It's on every single day and more on Sundays. And it's incredibly popular. Right? It's one of the, I think it might be the biggest podcast downloader at BBC. And and lots of people really, really love it. I absolutely hate it, and so do lots of other people. So this is The Archers Avoider. It just does one thing. So it's got that kind of thingness thing. It embodies one idea. And the idea is you press a button and it avoids the archers for you. So this silly box, which I haven't got any more left, is this laser cut box with a Raspberry Pi in it. It did work, but the silly box enabled us to have really interesting conversations with people about things like what you want to avoid on the radio, what stops you listening to things, what radio doesn't allow you to do, and what you do when other people in the room just won't stop listening to the Archers when you're in there. Because obviously radio is a social thing. Now, of course, if the BBC made an Archers Avoider, which it never would, it would be some sort of button, or it would be an app, something there. But just a physical object with a button help people imagine what it'd be like to react and behave in the world where this exists. And it's very single-minded. It's a physical object, but it's also pretty silly and funny. I've still got the BBC thing about balance. This is exclusively Archers. It just comes on when the Archers is on, turns itself off afterwards. So physicality and thingness get you quite a long way in getting over the expert-amateur barrier. So physical objects avoid the kind of flattening boringness of looking at screens and phones, that kind of effect where everything just looks like a little square and it all looks the same. And it also helps with distractibility, so people aren't constantly looking at their phones, they're looking at the funny thing in front of them. And so that gives you can persuade people to give you their attention and imagination by using the physical things as well. But so I just did a little show reel of some of the sillier things that we did. So that's a teddy bear that talks about TV. That's a memory box for audio. That's the modulator, which you turn the dial according to your mood. So they're pretty silly, they're pretty engaging, and that's, I think, really important. Sorry, run out. So the thingness helps with testability because it decomposes the problem into the things that the main problem that you're interested in. Physical things kind of summon people's attention and imagination, but humour and silliness diffuse one of the most significant problems in this amateur-expert relationship, which is the power differential. This is a very silly prototype, which is bees that help you predict what TV you should be watching. AI bees, in fact. So silliness, I think, is really significant in these kind of power relationships. In a corporate environment, you're not supposed to be silly. You're not supposed to have a laugh, and you're not, it's not supposed to be funny. It's all very serious. But it is the best way to give yourselves and others permission to say what's not being said, to find those things which are not being said. And obviously, it's a lot more fun. And when it comes to really significant power differentials, it lets you know that you're not intransigent and you don't know everything. This is one of my favourite projects. Me and my colleague Jasmine Cox went and asked 7 to 9-year-olds, tried to get them to think about the future, about future objects that they wanted to exist. And we had to get past all, oh, here come the boffins from, we don't look like boffins, here come the boffins from BBC R&D, get past that kind of expert status, make sure that the kids understood that their ideas are valuable. But we also wanted them to talk about their lives and not just talk about like Wall-E, which came up quite a lot, or something they'd done in class. So that was, you can see that they all made physical objects, and that was a way for us to express these kind of things. I don't know what that was, but that was a chemistry set that distilled things to make you happier. It was a really lovely and interesting experience. Being silly and funny is a lot easier with kids than it is with in corporate environments. But this is a huge lesson for me. So it's obvious, power differentials appear in the expert realm as well. And silliness can also work there. So I used to go to Hackspace and moan at Richard at the fact that BBC R&D wouldn't shut down projects. And so Richard and I made catwigs, which is a tool. I brought some here if anyone wants to look later. It's a tool to critique a project. So it's a tool to critique it in a funny way. So there's basically a bunch of cards like this. This is the kind of most important one. Does it solve a problem? And the idea is you draw analogies and you do it within a group, and you deal a few of these cards and you say, does it solve a problem? Is it more like antibiotics? It solves a massive problem for loads of people. Is it more like a garage door remote where, it's annoying to have to go and pull your garage door down if you've got one, but, it solves a problem but not a very important one. Or is it a catwig? It's just completely pointless and will annoy the cat. So doing this in a group where you think you're all equals, in fact, was a really big lesson to me, because it's a power button reset within a group working on a project, allowing people to speak out where they might not. There's lots of different ways of doing this. This is just one example, but turn taking and explicit rules for speaking can help enormously when people are hesitant to speak up. And often in this kind of environment, they are the people who have got hands-on experience and they've built the thing and they know about the technology. But it could be because, they're shy or they're young or they're very geeky or no one's ever listened to them. And you always find out something interesting when you let everyone speak. And of course, it leads to all sorts of questions about projects. So who gets to start and stop them? And is anyone willing to give up their power? Because for any of these techniques to be effective, you've got to want to know more and accept that you don't know everything. And I think one of the problems is that when you're an expert, whether that's in like JavaScript, sandwiches, finance, project management, any of those things, the temptation is to think that you know everything. You're a smart person. You know this. You take your little realm and you expand it out to everything else. And I'm very guilty of that. But just because you have that expertise in one area, you have to understand that that's you're expert in a limited area and you don't know everything about what young people want from TV or whatever it is. I think that's super important. Okay, what about the burrowing part, the bit where we're like burrowing our way around a particular area? That's the part where the experts take the new position in think space and think of things to be inspired, think of new things to be inspired by, to make. I really like this part. It's my favourite part. It's really exciting. You get to work with, either, in this case, we were working with young people who here are acting out being in a car and sharing their music. And the guy here is wearing a crown because what they worked out was whoever drives gets to decide what music to play. So we've done it. We used to do it collaboratively with end users. We also did it on our own with repeatedly going back to the end users and trying to find out what they thought of things. And we created several, actually hundreds of techniques to do that exploration. So what you're trying to do there is cover as much of the thing space around where you're looking as possible, so you don't want to miss things. And analogies are great for this. So it's another Richard special, this one. What if TV was milk? Okay, well, if it was milk, maybe you get it delivered every morning. It would have a limited amount. You'd run out. You have to nip down the shop and get a top up, or it goes off. So that kind of conversation can just lead you in lots of really interesting different directions. You start thinking, oh well, maybe the TV should go off, or anyway. Lots of them will be completely wrong, but one of them might be the way forward. Recently, my colleagues ex-colleagues Matthew Trier and Andrew Wood have been thinking more about flipping between the physical and the digital. So when we're looking about how to discover new music, we're thinking, where's places where you actually enjoy discovering new things? Maybe that's a lovely country walk, or it could be going to IKEA if that's your bag, and then flipping that. What's great about IKEA? What do they do really well? How can we translate that into something useful? But I think the key thing here, so there's loads of techniques, very standard techniques for holding workshops where you do this kind of thing and you do all the whatnot, and you have all these amazing ideas, and then you just kind of ignore them. You have a place where you decide quickly what it is that you want to do. Maybe it's the end of the day or whatever. What we did differently was we let them effloresce, so to let them develop and let people really think through those ideas. So you're not shutting it down too quickly, because that's where the distinctiveness comes in. That's where it's really, really helpful to have lots of different people in the room as well. And it's a bit like the Catwigs example, where you really need to give people the opportunity to speak and have half ideas and embarrass themselves and whatever it takes to make these things flourish, even if you throw them away later. And having a diverse team, in whatever way diversity is, it's just not having people who are exactly the same in the room. So it honestly almost doesn't matter. The more diverse it is, the better, but it could just be older and younger people. So it's really important to have that, because you just get a different range of ideas, and there's tons of evidence for this. Anyway, so I'm going to just talk about three. That's great, isn't it? Great slide. I'm going to just talk about three projects, which kind of three that talk about that illustrate some of these. So this one, I'm just going to play it to you. It's like 30 seconds long.
BK, you know. It's getting late and I don't know what's real and
still gotta get this working. AM, man's up early, or late, whatever your version. Make me nervous, on 10, body curving. Vinyl, I'm playing and searching. Still out here, scope on searching. Make me nervous.
So that's something called Orbit Music, I think, and it was made after I left, but I helped with the research that went up to it. So I didn't make it. The idea here is that you are moving through a space, and they've used machine learning to cluster music from BBC Introducing into different kind of spaces. So you're moving through those spaces, and it's just purely on the qualities of the music itself. So it's not anything to do with who made it or who's listened to it or anything like that. Because the BBC's got this huge resource, which is a million tracks that they have rights to do. People give them the tracks in order to be played on the radio. They all get listened to, but a tiny fraction get actually played. It's the nature of radio that happens. So this is a way for them to get more of an audience in a way that's kind of, but it's the idea is to make the discovery itself a pleasant and interesting experience, rather than have a player that just throws stuff out at you. And so this is Matthew Trier who mostly wrote this, and it was designed by my friend Tristan Fern. And the idea is, and what we did here was treat the 18 to 24s we were really interested in talking to almost like clients. So we found out about their lives. We made lots and lots of prototypes. This is where I learned how to make animated GIFs. So that's why they're all moving. So in the end, we made 10 prototypes and showed them in repeated iterations, so not all at once, but as a way to get to a really interesting place. And Orbit was the place that we got to. So the second project, there's not much going on in that slide, but this was kind of the quintessential using the three principles. So thinginess, physical objects, and what was the third thing? Oh, humour. Sorry. So we did some user research. We found out what annoyed people about watching TV. I don't know if we still watch TV. If you do, what annoyed these people was that it was a time to spend with friends and family, and it's kind of a low effort social thing, and everyone wants to do it and have a nice time and everything. If you spend the first half hour arguing over what to watch, or scrolling and just getting depressed and not finding anything at all, then you've lost like a third of the time you have to spend with your friends. So we did the whole physical object things, we tested it, and then we came up with 4 digital things. And this is pretty successful. So we went from quite silly things to much less silly possible things, but that still were testable and still quite thing-like. This one they should just do, because it's honestly, I've got half an hour to spend, just show me things that are half an hour long. It would be trivial to implement. The other really good one was, like, let's make it a game. So you choose 5 things, I'll choose 3 from then, you choose 1 from that, and then you're both invested in it, and perhaps, you get to choose next time. You get to choose the 5 next time. So all pretty successful, lots of things we tested, nothing ever happened about them. This is the last one I want to talk about. So this is called BBC Together. So I don't know about you, but during COVID, we really, really wanted to do something, and there wasn't anything we could do. So, we were TV researchers, really useful. But we realised we had this technology where we could synchronise video streams from across the web. So it's like, okay, let's make something where people can watch TV together in a very precise way. So you could even just phone someone up and it would be precise enough that you'd be watching exactly the same thing, which is really hard to do. And so this one wasn't so much about the techniques that I've been talking about, though we did use some of them, but more about like evaluation and its purposes, because this got hundreds of thousands of users. They only just turned it off. And the user interface was terrible, but it was something people wanted and needed. And it had great evaluation and all that kind of business. But you can't do what people want you to do in these circumstances. You can't show that you've got the best structure, the best techniques, the best ideas, the best people, by getting large numbers of people to use it or getting great qualitative feedback. And that's because the counterfactual is what already exists. And in the BBC, that's got millions and millions of people using iPlayer just as it is. So, why would you change? So it wasn't enough to change people's minds. And you never will be, I don't think. So blah, blah, Libby's great at this stuff, sees things differently, is very employable. Yes, I am. But the structures and norms we put in place around listening to potential end users, getting them to imagine futures, working in multidisciplinary teams, listening to our colleagues, speaking truth to power, making all this part of projects, showing everyone the results over and over, long term, didn't even change R&D, never mind the BBC. And that's where it all falls down, of course. So, sorry about the long quotes here, but I do think it's worth thinking about. So musing on this as one does after sort of 15 years of not achieve it, trying and failing to do something, I came across this really lovely and interesting page, which was books that this educator thought ought to exist and don't. So this is one of them. If anyone wants to write it, I would really like to read this. So this, this book is for people who've been managing research projects long enough to become frustrated and furious by institutional inefficiency, inertia and hypocrisy. Drawing on more than a century of community organising, it explains how to figure out where power actually resides, how to build support for change, how to get in a position to make those changes. This book focuses on the practical how of being the right person in the right room in the right day to make things better a little at a time. And I think, you know, this is a really good expression of the remaining part of the problem. We knew how to, sorry about this, flogging my analogy to death, we know how to find out lunching is evolving, and we know how to invent different kinds of lunches, and both of those are really, really valuable, or ought to be, to lunch providing or food providing organisations, if they're willing to listen. But what we don't know, we never knew, because we took people at face value when they said they were amenable to change, is how to get them to listen and then to act. And we were trying to build a new culture, which is kind of like new ruts in the world, but it didn't take, and I'm still interested in why that was. I mean, you might say that trying to work within nearly 100-year-old organisation might have been the problem, but yeah. I think we thought that it would be obvious how great the techniques we were using were because we were coming out with those amazing ideas. And we, in R&D, you do fail a lot. You know you're going to fail, and that's fine, but you don't expect to fail every time. So Matthew Trier, this is a quote from my ex-colleague Matthew Trier, who's a very brilliant guy, and he was saying, in fact, that they did listen to us eventually. We did get people to listen to us, but then they didn't or couldn't act on the recommendations we gave them, even when we presented them with existential threats to the organisation, because it was just too difficult for them to do so. And that's what he said. It's easier to drop it for them until time and external forces have eroded enough of a path so that there isn't a choice left and everyone just falls all at once into the new ravine. Okay, last quote. This is from Corey Dottero. I'm just really interested now in how we accelerate the falling into a ravine, because we can't prove that any of these things exist by the criteria that we're given. We need to create new cultures if we really believe that they are the right thing to do and they will improve technology for people. And he said this on one of the Wells State of the World thing earlier this year. Every time you see a group of people who've tried over some long time scale to do something without success, it's possible that their failure is down to having bad tactics, but it's far more likely that they failed because they just aren't powerful enough on their own to save the owls or the planet or their would-be ethno-state or whatever they're agitating for, better technology. And just to reiterate, it's important because these techniques and attitudes can, if actually acted on, lead us to technologies that are closer to what people actually want and need. So I'm going to do some questions and answers. If you have tried anything similar to this or not, or you think I'm talking nonsense, or have you succeeded in changing organisations, and how did you know? And have you changed institutional minds? And like how? Because I would love to know, and I would love to build more coalitions around that. This is me. I'm also on Mastodon. That's my blog, where I will put some links and a version of these slides as well. And I am Libby at nicecupoftea.org if you want to email me. So I'm very interested in what you think. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Libby. That was really interesting. Does anyone have any questions? I've got a microphone here. It doesn't amplify your voice in the room, but it does mean that the people watching online can hear you. So please don't rap into it. I know it's tempting, but if you have any questions, I will come and pass you a mic. Speechless. Yeah?
Hi, Libby.
Hiya.
As a team leader working in these spaces, how have you felt, or how have you been able to, or maybe not, been able to keep up morale? I think you know, you can get clever people together, and there are so many clever people. There's probably a million, loads of clever people here. But when you do fail, or when you are limited in what you're able to do, it can be a bit disheartening. So how do you keep the clever people going, I guess?
So it's a really good question because, so in an environment like that, what tends to happen is that you just start a new project, and if it's sufficiently interesting enough, the thing about clever technical people is you can engage them with the technology, and that's true of me as well. So you can engage with technology, and you can engage with them with people's wants. So we just used to start a new project, and honestly, for about 13 and a half years, that actually suited me just fine as well, because it was a really, really good job, and it is really, really interesting. So although it can be a bit disheartening, there's always something exciting to do. So like that.
Anyone else?
Shall I do another one?
Go again. Yeah, go again.
I'm just going to interview you, Libby. I love the idea of silliness. I'm an innately silly person, and I love it. But I also know that sometimes you feel, not you personally, I feel quite, a bit embarrassed-ish. I have a high threshold for it, put it that way. But do you feel that there's a cultural difference, say, working in England with this, like getting, let's go for a stereotype, middle-aged white English men to be silly, especially if they are powerful or rich or in charge, seems like it seems more difficult than it is for maybe the less empowered or people from different countries who have a different view of what silly might be. Do you find that there are differences in that way?
Yeah, I mean, so we used to do quite a lot of European projects, and they weren't silly at all. They really weren't, and that was very difficult to inject any kind of human. Partly for cultural reasons, like catwigs, for example, are very, very specific to the UK, and they don't really translate. I do think it's as you gain more power, it's harder to be silly. I think that's just the nature of the beast. But sometimes it can still be done. Often there's some silliness lurking under people's, a serious external carapace.
Brilliant, thank you. I look forward to meeting powerfully silly people.
Hi, Libby.
Hi.
When you asked the question, like, how do you know when you've succeeded?
Yeah.
What would you consider to be success in that context of the BBC? Like, what were you shooting for?
Any change to the main product would have been something. So the main product we were looking at was iPlayer, which is incredibly popular, has many millions of viewers every day. So with quite good reason, they don't really want R&D people messing with it, like certainly not technically. And there's also quite heavy technical debt and quite heavy like keeping up with the Joneses. So if most people are using Netflix, let's say, it needs to provide some of the same properties that Netflix does, like things like skip credits or whatever. It's boring things from my perspective, but it takes a lot of work to make that happen. So something, and we did get a tiny bit of code in iPlayer, and then for 2 weeks, and then they took it away because the test didn't prove anything. Yeah.
And the people you were accountable to, like whoever was like giving you guys money to do cool stuff, like what were their expectations?
That's a really good question. We had a number of really very good bosses who used to keep a lot of the shit away from us. And I think we were also quite entertaining for them. I don't really know. They expected us to come up with interesting things and then sell them within the organisation, and that's what we tried to do. But yeah, I guess our evaluation didn't rely on us succeeding in our sense. I mean, as I said, R&D does fail a lot. You expect it to fail, so we did that.
Thanks.
Hi, we've been having a very lively chat on YouTube, so I recommend you to read the messages and the questions. But I'm going to read, not the questions actually, I'm going to read them now. Brendan says, great talk, interested in how you agree the politics of the facilitator. Feels like, does it solve a problem is quite a loaded question to come from, especially in a cultural organization.
I disagree. I think you're only trying to do things that solve some problem some person has, and ultimately that's why any of us does anything. Maybe. I mean, I guess sometimes technology is like a crossword. You know, it's just an entertainment. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily regard the BBC. I don't know. It's above my pay grade to discuss it as a cultural organisation. R&D is quite separate from the kinds of things that we did. Does that answer it? These are loaded questions because they're designed. So some of the things like, will it make us money, which doesn't apply to the BBC, but they're just a bit more general, so they can be used in other places. But you can just ignore them if that's not what you're interested in. They're loaded questions because you want to elicit opinions from people. But that's different from when you might be, let's say, talking to an individual about their lives, where it would be a much different kind of conversation, and you do it with, you know, an expert user researcher and things like that. Or, yeah, I think that's the difference. It's being used in different contexts. I hope that answers the question. I can always talk to people later if you want.
Yeah, you can look at the comments. They might ask a following question on that. Ruth recommends reading Enid Mumford's participatory IT system design methods in the 1970s.
Oh.
And Ruth also has a question. I'm interested in what her dreams, your dreams, will look like. The sillier, the better. The dream projects.
Dream project. All right, it's pretty silly. So I volunteer at the Cube. I got sucked into doing finance stuff because I know my way around a spreadsheet. So we're doing the accounts. After a year, I realised we got years worth of accounts. We should make some music out of them. So we've been making music and visualizations based on the accounts. And so there's a bit in there that we can make them a bit more interesting to people or kind of make them a bit more understandable. But actually, that's just not happening. It's just we're making some funny noises out of the accounts and putting them in the cinema. So if you go to the Cube, you currently get a massive trailer for the bar for the last 3 months as music. I hope that's silly enough. I'm really developing my silliness practice. It's early days.
An awesome response. Thank you. And again, I don't think we have any more questions, but the chat has been very interesting and
Okay, I'll
lively.
look at it later.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Do you have any suggestions for changing institutional minds? Because it seems this is a historical problem. I mean, it's just recurring again and again and again.
Yeah,
You've got creative people with brilliant solutions, but they come up against barriers of established procedures and set ways of doing things. So from your practical experience, have you got any suggestions, please?
We got more people to listen when we were very clear with numbers that there was a real problem that the BBC needed to solve, whether that was, and they knew, but we tried to make it as vivid as we possibly could. Young people aren't using the BBC. Young people will never use the BBC. They're not coming back. So that kind of problem. But I honestly don't know. I think in retrospect, probably what we ought to have done, now that I know there are other organisations doing similar kind of things. So, for example, I was speaking to someone from Gov UK, and they do similar kinds of processes for a very different purpose. We should have gone out there, made coalitions with those organisations, and then come back and said, look, government are doing this. Why aren't we doing this? This is the right thing to do. And then you've got much more ammunition than, I don't know. That's the best I can come up with at the moment.
Yeah, so coming from I work at the university, at Bristol University,
Yeah.
and think a similar kind of thing. Change is slow. It happens, but it's slow.
Right.
And I've been there long enough that I'm slightly torn between actually whether that's in some ways a good thing because it protects some aspects of what the organisation is, or and where it's a bad thing. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how you would decide whether it was reticence to change or actually protecting something that's good.
Yeah, it's really hard. And because those things will be, they're fighting for the same resources. And you can see this within the BBC. They've shut down local radio because they need the money for websites. So it's a generational thing. And yeah, it's exactly that kind of thing. I don't know. That's well above my pay grade. I would have said that the testing that we do is really important there, and to just make things really evidence-based. So the kinds of testing we did here were very much... there were early days testing. They were like, this is a good thing, but we don't know if it's going to be super popular, and we don't know the rest of the effects. I don't know. I think that's a really, really hard problem. And the conservatism with the small c of the BBC is really important in some ways. It continues to have valuable things that it's always had. But that's no use if no one watches it or listens to it.
Yeah, also, can you definitely make them do the search by length? I would love to be able to search radio by length. That would be amazing.
They already have that metadata. Just do it.
Just to share some maybe more positive examples of some stuff. Not that I have made myself personally, but a programme that I've been involved with over the last 3 or 4 years as a researcher, a community tech programme. So looking at generally very small community organisations that are making their own technologies, and by and large doing that quite successfully, although like with no money, because the whole reason that any of those technologies exist is because that's what their communities have said they want and need. So they've started with, what do people tell us they need? And then how can we build a technology to meet that need, rather than, we need to make a shiny thing. It's all about the people and what they want and need. And then the technology is shaped around that. And they're very small, most of them, and they do it on like a shoestring and a prayer. But there's some just such inspiring and brilliant things that do exist. How you would ever kind of scale that up into organisations that aren't primarily about the community and what the community needs, I don't know. But I think there is something to kind of learn from that it's starting with people and starting with people's needs. And building from there. And they, some of them are doing very cool stuff.
I'd love to know more about that, actually. That sounds great. Yeah.
There is a website, communitytech.network, with some great examples on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the real problems, you get into stupid things like, because tech salaries are so high, the BBC can barely afford them, let alone a small organisation.
Yes, so there's like some amazing volunteers, basically, or people that will say, I'll take 1/10 of the salary because they believe in the cause, basically.
Yeah, which is really a lot. And those are artificially inflated because of the nonsense, big tech company. Yeah, anyway. Yes. Thank you.
Any other questions? I've got a question, actually. Thanks. You've spoken a little bit about young people.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to recognise that young people aren't accessing the BBC. I wondered if firstly you could talk a little bit about why that is, and also in your actual direct experience working with young people for prototyping, can you give us a sense of what whether there's any kind of hope in their eyes of viability of careers in creative technology and the culture sector?
Yeah, we didn't really talk to them about that kind of thing. I think about the latter question, we were just really talking about how they interacted with social media and other technology, principally in this case sound technology, and the role of sound in their lives. I think it's a really tricky one, and the people we spoke to, which was quite, always you're speaking to just a few people at a time. That's why you have to kind of ramp up your testing later on. But it was it was very striking to me anyway, the high levels of mental health problems that people we spoke to, the feeling they had of being very stuck, so kind of stuck in algorithms that were just giving them the same thing over and over again. They kept saying things like, oh, well, it is what it is. And, you know, it may just have been that particular groups we spoke to, but it was quite a thing. And what it felt to me like was that the tools, the technology tools they were using had kind of captured their attention and held it. So, and the BBC's not designed like that deliberately. So sometimes you see things where they'll try and do it a little bit, but they'll do it so badly that like it just doesn't work. But but you know, there's no compunction to do that with something like TikTok or Reels or whatever. It's an addictive technology, and they were addicted to it. So we had this chap, and he was actually a musician. So he was, you know, not professionally, but he wanted to do music. He said he had to throw his phone onto something soft across the room in order to stop him just lying in bed scrolling. And so that's what we heard. You know, I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for younger people. I'm not a younger person. Mm-hmm. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, is there any? Well, no, I don't know about the creative technologies. I think it's really tough. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, if anyone has any. No?
I don't know.
Right. Cool.
It's fair.
Thank you so much for your time, Libby. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Really
we'll leave it there. If
appreciate
anyone
that.
wants to find out more about the Pervasive Media Studio, you can come find me or my colleague Celia at the back. And if you want to stick around the hot desk, you're more than welcome to, and join us for next week's talk, Crafting the Zero Moment with Automata, which is a French, Montreal-based digital installation company. You're so late, man. Hey, no, don't worry. Cool. If you have any more questions and you don't want to come talk to us, then send me an email, studio@watershed.co.uk.
Thanks so much.